Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Lyoko Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing part 2 of the two-part Code Lyoko special, XANA Awakens. And since it's a two-parter, let's briefly summarize part 1. I'm just going to briefly summarize part 1. As we showcased last week, this special is supposed to be essentially an origin story for Code Lyoko, explaining how the group discovered Lyoko, how they figured it out, etc., etc. Pretty much part 1 was just kind of setting up all the superficial elements. Pretty much we see Jeremy activating the tower, discovering Aelita, and who at the time had absolutely no memories of who she was. And ultimately the episode showcased how certain elements were introduced. For example, we learned how Ulrich and Odd met. It turns out Odd was his roommate, and Odd was his roommate. How they got involved with Lyoko. When Jeremy turned on the supercomputer, XANA woke up, attacked Jeremy because he knew about the supercomputer. Ulrich saved him during one of his attacks, so he wanted to know what was going on, so Jeremy told him, and Odd got pulled in because they discovered the scanners, and they had to find a way to deactivate, and they had to test them out, so Ulrich, who was mad at Odd, wanted to test it out on his dog Kiwi. Odd woke up, discovered it, and when he tried to save Kiwi, he accidentally wound up becoming a test subject instead. From there, the rest of the episode just kind of devolved. From there, they went into Lyoko, fought some monsters, discovered where the activated tower was, and ultimately Jeremy was attacked by XANA yet again, except this time he took control of some wires. Also, Ulrich and Odd had discovered the tower that XANA activated was in the ice sector, but they got devirtualized. And ultimately, and the episode just kind of ended after they devirtualized and saved Jeremy. So, yeah. Also, Sissi was there. So, yeah. Anyway, this episode actually picks up the day after all those events. It also explains why Odd changed his hair, because in part 1, Odd had a mullet, as I said, but apparently, the reason he changed his hair was because of his look on Lyoko. Apparently, the spiky hair that he had on Lyoko, he actually liked, and so he started wearing that in the real world. As the next day in the cafeteria, Ulrich and Sissi are sitting at the table, and Odd comes in with the hairdo. And pretty much, Jeremy's just trying to figure out exactly... And at this point, Jeremy's still trying to figure out how everything in Lyoko works. Yeah, even managing to find the return of the past function in all of his searching. However, he's still trying to figure out exactly he's still trying to figure out how to get Aelita into the real world, and through his studies, he's actually kind of figured out how the towers work, and his explanation kind of helps explain a lot of how things in the show work. Essentially, the towers in Lyoko are portals, so to speak. And basically, by accessing them, you can it can allow anyone who utilizes them to essentially enter the real world. And it actually explains why whenever XANA attacks, he utilizes one of the towers. And it kind of explains why this kind of is part of Carthage. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, and when they talked about that, essentially, since the Project Carthage was supposed to be like a countermeasure for was supposed to be like a countermeasure to attacks and so forth. It makes sense why it kind of makes sense why Carthage would be set up like this. You enter a code into the supercomputer, enter the code into the tower, and the code essentially becomes reality. And you can essentially, it's a very powerful computer. It's a very powerful computer. It essentially lets you to screw with the universe, and it explains why XANA is able to do the things he can do. Since he's an AI or whatever, he can essentially access the towers, and it actually explains why whenever he activates one, his physical form, so to speak, in the real world is a black smoke / ooze or whatever. As that's literally him going into the tower and messing with something in the real world. It actually kind of explains how XANA has been able to do all those things, since the towers are supposed to be like the link between our world and Lyoko. It explains why whenever XANA activates one, he can screw with something in our world. It's rather interesting. I like that. I actually do like that. But however, Jeremy's still in the early stages in this episode, so he believes that whenever the tower is activated, i.e. when it's red, that they can essentially utilize that it can be used as a regular gateway, and he thinks that if he gets Aelita to the tower, then he can devirtualize her. But the problem is they're still aware of the monsters that live on Lyoko, so they know that Aelita can't go by herself. The group decided they're gonna. As such, the group collectively decides they'll go back to Lyoko at least one last time to help Aelita get to the tower. Though Sissi says she has cheerleader practice first. The groups just kind of split off to do their own thing, with Jeremy and Odd going off to the library, while Ulrich goes to have another fight with Yumi. And likewise, Sissi goes to do her practice, but once again, XANA attacks. This time, not just going after Jeremy, but going after each one of the groups, starting with Sissi, as after her cheerleader practice goes horrible, she goes back to her room and she's attacked by a giant ball of electricity that shocks her so badly that she falls unconscious. Thankfully, Nicholas and Herb are nearby because this episode explains how she met them. Apparently they were admirers from afar, and they formed a little fan club around her. But they saw what happened. They saw what happened to her, and they brought her to the infirmary. As such, it's at this time that Jeremy and Odd are walking by the infirmary, and they hear Nicholas and Herb explain what happened, and they realize, oh, this is bad, and they realize that this is another XANA attack. Though at this point they don't know XANA is behind this, so they realize they have to get to the factory and pretty much get Aelita to the tower, because they know that whatever's in that computer, it's dangerous, and pretty much like Jeremy said, their main priority is to get Aelita out of there, and the instant they get her out, they think they can just turn off the computer and all these attacks should stop. However, it's at this time that Ulrich and Yumi finish their fight, and they finally get formally introduced. And at that point, XANA ends up attacking them with the same ball. Ulrich and Yumi manage to escape, and it's at that point that Ulrich gets the call to meet at the factory. Ulrich at first tries to just leave Yumi, as she's not personally involved in this, but just like with Ulrich the night before, she's just like, no, you know what's going on, I want an explanation. He doesn't really want to give it to her and just plans to abandon her, but she pretty much just forces the issue and says, you can tell me or we can fight again. At which point Ulrich just kind of accepts defeat and says, alright, fine, I'll explain on the way. As such, we finally get an explanation for how Yumi joined the group, as she goes with him goes into the sewers, and pretty much just is carried along for the ride. In the meantime, though, the electrical orb is now following them, and back at Caddick, Sissi finally wakes up and is immediately worried for the group, because this thing is targeting all of them, and she realizes that they're at risk. Of course, at which point she then tells her father, Jim, and the nurse about what's going on. At first they think she's just crazy, but Sissi pretty much just forces the issue as she runs out of the infirmary and goes to the sewer entrance. And as such, the group manages to make it to the factory, and in the meantime, Aelita herself has been doing a bit of exploration, as she just while she was waiting for Jeremy, she heard the thumping that usually alerts that Xan is up to something, and so she left the tower that she was hiding in, and instead ends up traveling to another one, which leads her to the mountain sector and to a group of hornets and Cagrolites. She manages to outrun them and makes a run for another tower, which brings her to the ice sector, but again, she's still cornered by more monsters. Thankfully, it's at this point that Ulrich, Odd, and Yumi manage to get in. What I kind of like is that Yumi, while she doesn't ask too many questions, she's clearly surprised and in awe of everything that's happening, as she's still a little surprised, and when Odd and Ulrich decide they're going to get virtualized, Yumi's like, what? Yumi at first doesn't believe any of it, but then finally decides, wait, no, I'm going in too. And so all three of them get virtualized, and we see her first go on Lyoko. And what I like, too, is that while Ulrich and Odd immediately realize they have to go help Aelita because Jeremy says that she's in danger, Yumi just takes a moment to take it all in before she joins them. It's small, but I like that. But they do manage to save Aelita from more of the monsters, but unfortunately, that's when they get kind of in the real world, things are kind of getting hairier, as the electrical orb manages to get to the computer lab where Jeremy is, and likewise, Sissi, her dad, and Jim manage to make it to the factory as well, just as the orb is attacking Jeremy. Thankfully, and on top of that, on Lyoko, as they're getting close to the tower, they get an encounter with the group ends up getting an encounter with crabs, and while they're able to take out one, unfortunately, one by one, they each get devirtualized until finally it's just Yumi and Aelita. At this, however, before Aelita can corner, we see her first discover one of her powers as she just on instinct, just kind of ends up doing her song as she materializes a wall of ice to block the crab from shooting her. And again, based on Yumi's reaction and Aelita's reaction, she didn't know she could do that. So again, she just did it on instinct. But they realize don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and Aelita just makes a run to the tower, while Yumi ends up getting devirtualized after the crab breaks through. But bottom line, Aelita managed to get to the tower. And again, she still thinks she doesn't know how everything goes, but when she runs in, suddenly a console appears. We see her reaction to it, doesn't know what to do, but she just puts her hand on, and this is where she finally learns her name. As every time she usually deactivates the tower, she just has her hand scanned. It says her name, it's like it's identifying her, and so when she does it, the whole thing just kind of goes automated as it immediately says code Lyoko, and the tower's deactivated, and the electrical orb just disappears. However, while the day is saved, unfortunately, the group still has witnesses. Like I said, Sissi brought Jim and the principal to this place too, and they saw the orb attacking Jeremy. And at this point, the group comes out from the scanner room, and when they see that Sissi blabbed, they get pissed at her. Because earlier in the episode, the group pretty much made a pact to not tell anyone about this because they knew the dangers of it. They knew that if people learned about the supercomputer, they'd want it turned off, and Jeremy wants to get Aelita out of there. Again, it's not a that's not an awful concern. Even Ulrich says that this isn't worth it. No, so a couple points, which again kind of goes back to his a-hole kind of thing behavior. But again, these are very human reactions. This thing is very dangerous. But pretty much the group is pissed at Sissi because she blabbed about this. Though she counters with, "I was worried about you, and I'm not gonna, and you should be thanking me for helping you guys." The bottom line, they just tell Jeremy, "Turn the thing off. It's dangerous." But Jeremy still doesn't want to give up to try and save Aelita, and at which point he realizes that he decides he's going to test out the return to the past function as he inputs the code, turns it on, and just as before, and just as we've seen many times before, the supercomputer emits a giant blast of energy that covers the entire area and rewinds time to the previous day. Specifically, back when Ulrich and Odd were just kind of standing around waiting. Yumi was getting and Yumi and Jeremy were getting their coffee. However, what's interesting though is that when they activate it, they're actually in their surprise bit, which also is funny because now Odd's back to having his mullet. But of course, they're just wondering what the heck happened. But when they ask Jeremy about it, he has no idea what they're talking about. Like they said, "Do you remember the attack? Do you remember anything?" And he's like, "No, what are you talking about?" And he's actually surprised that that the three of them know about Lyoko, since at that point he hadn't told anyone yet. At which point they kind of fill him in on everything, and they go to talk to Aelita, and pretty much Aelita. What I kind of like is that not only does Aelita tell Jeremy what her real name is, but they do pretty much explain that. But she does argue that what I kind of like is that Aelita herself is actually arguing for turning the supercomputer off because it's dangerous. People can get hurt, and she doesn't want people to get hurt just to help her, just for her sake. Jeremy just kind of says, "No, just give me a day. Just give me a day to figure it out. Maybe I can find something." And so the group concedes and gives him a day. At which point it cuts to the next day, and to this point Jeremy has done more research and has finally figured out everything he needs to know for the most part. As he learned that, like, this is where they finally learn about XANA's existence in the supercomputer, and how whenever he activates a tower, he can screw with the real world, but how Aelita is essentially the counter to that, as she can deactivate the tower and stop his attacks on the real world. Of course, Jeremy says that if they can just devirtualize Aelita, then they can just turn the supercomputer off and his attacks would stop. But again, Aelita's arguing that she doesn't want people to be put in danger, and if XANA's awake, then he could constantly run. launch an attack against the real world, and they wouldn't be able to defend themselves, considering that what the first attack was like. However, in a kind of nobler moments, the group decides, you know what, it's worth the risk. We fought him off before. We can do it again if we have to, and we'll do it as many times as it takes until Aelita is out of the supercomputer. At which point they just tell Jeremy, yeah, they're gonna help him out regardless, and none of them are gonna tell. It's actually a really nice scene. It's actually and it ultimately helps establish just what's happened, how the group met, and how the group was finally founded, and the episode ends with them just making the pact of fending off XANA whenever he attacks until Jeremy can devirtualize Aelita. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. It was getting dark. I got my phone for a light. But yeah, that's where the episode ends, and it's actually a really nice end. It's actually kind of a nice ending, and it's just kind of it does kind of end things on a nice note. Just kind of helps setting up how things were going to go for the first season onward. So yeah. So overall, what did I think of the XANA Awakens two-parter? Overall, I think it's nice. The first part, in my opinion, kind of suffers from a bit of rushed storytelling, as it's really trying to get, as it tries to, as we don't really, as again, part of the problem is that we don't really see Jeremy discovering the supercomputer. Instead, it's just told that how Jeremy discovered it through exposition. But from there, the plot kind of moves at a rather brisk pace. Not a bad, as one by one we see how many of the superficial elements in the show ultimately became more prominent. We see how Ulrich and Odd meet and how their friendship was established. We see what brought each member of the group into the sorry, my dog jumped off the bed. How each member of the group was brought into the fold with, hold on a sec again. Sorry about that, needy dog. Anyway, as I was saying, it does, it helps showcase, hold on. I guess hold on. Oh, just love technology. Anyway, as I was saying, it helps set up many of the elements, how they each met, how each got pulled into the group, and just kind of ultimately what set them on this journey. Again, what I kind of like is that they all know the risks of leaving the supercomputer on, and admittedly, the initial reasons are sort of a little selfish, but I don't like saying that though, because I do know these characters, and Aelita is still a regular character. And I know Aelita, but one of the things I like though is that they know the risks, but they're willing to take them because they're trying to help a friend. In this case, it's not just Jeremy, but Aelita. They get to meet her, they know her, and they realize maybe it is worth the risk if just to help her get out, if just to save her. And I like that. Again, it's a little selfish, but not too much. They are genuinely trying to help someone, and they know that the risks of doing this are that there will be more XANA attacks, but ultimately they realize we've dealt with them, so we can deal with them again. So I like that. They know the risks, but they're willing to accept them if just for the sake of Aelita. And it helps show how the group is initially formed. So that's nice. It also helps that the episode does sort of answer some questions that you have throughout the series. For example, as we've seen throughout the show, the return of the past function doesn't seem to have an effect on anyone that goes to Lyoko, yet Jeremy has never been affected. And why is that? The reason for that is because at some point off screen he did scan himself into the supercomputer. Because after the initial return to the past, he did, and he had no memory of it. Even he said that it appears that it doesn't affect anyone that's been on Lyoko, so I'm gonna have to scan myself later. Again, the group tries to tell him, no, you should turn that thing off, but again, he managed to talk them down from that because he wants to know more about what's really going on, which is what leads him to discovering XANA, how he works, etc. And it also answers another question that I've had throughout the series. Why isn't Sissi made a regular member of the group? Because as we've seen, she does still have her nobler qualities, and when push comes to shove, she has helped the group. She has helped the group and ways that have been supported them. Well, this episode explains why they never made her an official member of the group. Because it's Sissi. While she does have her nobler qualities, and even in the beginning, she is willing to work with the group on this, unfortunately, she's still vain, she's still egotistical, and as we saw while she is concerned for the group, and while her reaction is again realistic, as she was attacked and she's worried for the group, She's worried for the group. Again, when she does learn that they brought Yumi into this, she gets angry at them, and she's still full of herself. She is still that much of an egotistical bitch. And it doesn't help. And again, it helps. It does help that Aelita, that it helps that she looked at Aelita as just an acceptable risk. And in the beginning, even Ulrich had that kind of mindset, which helped further cement that he's kind of a dick. That it's not worth the risk. That they should just turn it off because Aelita's not even human. To which I responded every time with "up yours," because while she may not be human, she still can think, feel, and process information like a normal person. So I think that the fact that she actually did agree at several points to just turn off the supercomputer because of the risks involved. There is humanity there. There is something akin to a soul there. So yeah, still up yours. Still, so yeah, up yours. So with that in mind, with how she acted in the first episode, that knowing about the secret initially, and the fact that knowing about the secret initially, it explains why the group never made her a full member of the group, which just makes me think of the season 1 finale in Jim and how I wish he was still a member of the group. But that's another topic. But whatever. So it does further explain that. There are some elements that I don't feel needed to be explained, like there was a superficial detail of how Sissi met Nicholas and Herb, and I'm assuming that same thing happened in and after they returned to the past. So, whatever. But otherwise though, it is kind of nice seeing how these elements come together. I like that we learn the reason why Odd went from a mullet to the hairdo we've seen throughout the show is because of Lyoko, because his hair was styled like that while he was in Lyoko, and he liked it, so he started doing that all the time. We see how Ulrich got brought in, because he helped Jeremy and he wanted to know answers. And while he is still a dick, I'm never gonna stop calling him that. I still don't like that. I still don't like him because of that. He does still have his nobler qualities, and when he does get to know Aelita more, he is more willing to accept the risks. And Yumi, and this episode helps showcase how more of the chemistry that helped attract Ulrich to Yumi and Yumi to Ulrich. Because while Yumi's kind of a better person than Ulrich, they're both cut from the same cloth. They're both tenacious, can fight, don't take no for an answer, and will willingly rush in if they think there's trouble. And Yumi ultimately was that kind of character, as once they were attacked by that giant orb, she wanted answers, Ulrich knew them, and so she wasn't leaving him alone until she got some, and that's what ultimately brought her in. I kind of like that. Honestly though, I feel like the biggest problem in that regard, however, for her at least, is that's just how she was brought in. At least for Ulrich and Odd, we saw more of them before they were pulled into Lyoko and just kind of established their dynamic. Whereas with Yumi, she was kind of the outsider that was brought in. Like, she had nothing to do with the group, and she and Ulrich and her only connection was through Ulrich. And from there, she was brought in to be she was made a regular member of the group because she and Ulrich started seeing more of each other, and she happened to be present during one of the XANA attacks. So, while it is interesting, I do kind of like how she came in, at the same time, I feel like that she should have had more time dedicated to her. And again, while the pace is okay after you get used to it, it still kind of feels a little rushed in areas. Like the finale with how Jeremy discovers XANA, that's just as quick an explanation as the exposition in the beginning of the two-parter. It's just, okay, I figured this out. Here's the 411. But now, to be fair, again, it doesn't really matter if you know these things, because one of the problems, because again, it feels like that the special kind of goes in thinking that you know enough about Lyoko, because ultimately it doesn't do much to establish the characters beyond just simply having them and showcasing how they met. But in my opinion, and again, this is just for me, I find that to be a problem. The thing is, it's still an origin story, so I think it would be really kind of and one of the problems I had toward Lyoko in the beginning is that it really just throws you into the deep end of the pool and expects you to learn how to swim. And again, to be fair, when you do get into the show, it becomes easier to digest as you're able to figure out all the elements and figure out, okay, so this is the thing, so XANA's the thing, and XANA's in the thing, these are how everything works. This is the dynamic between the show. Yada yada yada. But again, there's still no explanation. So if you're a newcomer, it can be a little alienating. And unfortunately, this origin story feels just kind of feels in a similar case. I say similar, but not the exact same, because again, it is an origin and it does explain how all these things go. But a problem with that is that it's an origin story that was aired between seasons 2 and 3 slash after season 3 for those that don't speak English. So in essence, so again, it expects you to know quite a bit about Code Lyoko going into the special. It really just feels like it's there to help give the fans of the show, okay, so here's how everything got started. And to be fair, it is nice, and I do like seeing how all this got started. But again, it operates under the mindset of okay, so you've seen Code Lyoko here, so here's how everything goes. It does expect you to know some of what of Code Lyoko before stepping into the show. It does expect you to at least be somewhat familiar with the characters. And unfortunately, I kind of consider that a problem for what is essentially supposed to be an origin story. Again, because if you did want to watch Code Lyoko and you decided, okay, this is the origin story, then I'll start here, you would still be a little lost on certain elements. Like, why is everything... Like, it's like, wait, what? Like, if you learn in the beginning, if you saw the exposition, I feel like you would still be a little lost, and the just quick blink and you'll miss it explanation of XANA and how he works and how it works with Aelita, I feel is just as brief and just as what the hell kind of inducing. That is a problem for the special. Again, it expects... And again, it's not a problem if you're a longtime fan. It's just that if you're a newcomer and you decided you want to start with the actual origin story, then I think you are going to end up being a little lost. I do... Like, there have been times when I have been forgiving of stuff like this, like with when I looked at Danny Phantom, as that show actually did give a brief explanation of how Danny got his powers in the theme song, and the first episode did show the fallout from that as he was still getting used to his powers. But again, I feel like that for this is still a problem. It does still expect you to know enough. For an origin story, it expects you to know enough about the characters to get used to them, but to just kind of dive right in. But if you're a newcomer, I do feel like you're going to be scratching your head at least a couple times here and there. But again, with that being said, it's still a nice two-parter. While it is a little rushed in some areas, and it does, and it feels like and doesn't explain everything as much as a regular origin story should go. For what it is, though, it's still the pacing is still brisk for any parts that aren't rushed. It has good pacing, good action. I do like learning and for the stuff that they do explain it well. I like seeing how they discover the elements one by one. How they discuss how Aelita is learning more about her abilities, how Jeremy is slowly learning how the supercomputer works, how the group just bit by bit comes together just in tangential different ways. First Jeremy, then Ulrich, then Odd, then Yumi. Why they utilize certain elements, why certain aspects of the show are the way they are, what set them on their journey, what kept them going. And again, I do like that. It was a slightly selfish reason, but also selfless too. Again, this is all for the sake of one person who they don't even know is real, but at the same time, they know enough. They've gotten to know her enough so they feel like that she does deserve to have the chance to be helped, and that she does deserve to have a real life. So I do like that. It does, and it is kind of nice to see them do this for someone that they still don't know that much about. It shows just it's the beginning of the bonds of these people, the strong ties of friendship that keep them together and help and allow them to help each other thick and thin as the series went on, and ultimately into what it became by the time the special aired. It's actually really nice, and again, it's actually really nice. And while I do complain about this origin story not being too beginner friendly, for longtime fans, it is still nice to see how these characters united, and ultimately what kept them going, and what made them want to continue fighting. I like that. It's small, but I do like that. So will give this credit to the special for that. It is still, while I do feel like it could be more beginner friendly, and some aspects of the origin are a little rushed, for what we do have here, it's still really nice. The characters are still really cool. It's still nice seeing how they came together. I do like how they explain how certain elements work and why they are the way they are. Why Jeremy is immune to the return to the past, because again, off-screen scan. They scan how they how they learned about this, how they kind of figured out the pieces bit by bit, and of course why Sissi's not a regular member of the group. As I've talked about that, and I think this two-parter provided a good explanation for why they never brought her in. Again, there's only so much bitchiness someone can take, so yeah. Overall, well, I feel like the special does have problems. I'm not gonna deny it. I still think this is a really nice. I think this is still a really nice special. It's got flaws, but it's still really nice, really fun. And if you're a fan of Lyoko and haven't seen this origin story, I would recommend watching it. And not just again, it's not. I don't feel as it doesn't as it answers. It doesn't answer a lot of questions. It's still nice to see how the group came together and what pushed and what drove them to want to continue their travels despite the risks. So yeah, overall, good two-parter. So yeah, I think so. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much all I can say about it. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and before we go, I have something I want to just say something. Well, instead, next week we're not going to be going back to Lyoko. In fact, the Lyoko retrospectives are actually going to be delayed a week. I'm not going to stop. I'm still going to look at Lyoko. I'm still going to look at season 3, but next week I'm going to be backpedaling slightly. I'm I'm going to be going back to a franchise. I'm going to be going back to a vlog series that I had previously stopped to look at a new piece of material from the franchise. Again, I'm not stopping the Lyoko retrospectives. You can expect the vlog for the first episode of season 3 in a couple weeks, but next week, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be taking a quick foray back to the Ben 10 franchise as we take a look at the 5th film to be released under the Ben 10 moniker, Ben 10 versus the Universe. So, yeah. Until then, I'll take care.